Something's creeping, it's right outside. So come on in, and don't be shy. We've got ghosts and UFOs. Brace yourself, get ready for the show. Don't be afraid of the dark. The fun's about to start. Nightmares, our tales will inspire. Oh, tonight at the Scaredy Campfire. Have you heard tell of a demon next door? Or maybe a cryptid on the lake shore? There's nothing too strange for us here. So if you're ready, stamp out your fear. Don't be afraid of the dark. The fun's about to start. Nightmares, our tales will inspire. Tonight at the Scaredy Campfire. Whoa, whoa.
Welcome back for episode 3 of the Scaredy Campfire, campers. We're back with even more stories this time. A huge thank you from us here at the Scaredy Campfire to all of you out there who let us use your stories. It's always very much appreciated. Our first story comes from Eternal Reverie 1 on Reddit. This happened a long time ago. I was around 13 or 14 in northwestern Georgia on the corner of Alabama and Tennessee. For context, I'm now 22. I was at my stepdad's house, which is situated down a long driveway in the woods. There's a house just ahead of his separated by a thin veil of trees, but no other houses or buildings for a good few miles on either side, and the woods in the back go on for a good while, so it's very isolated. I had taken my dog Jack out for a walk. Rest in peace, Jack, he passed a while back. And as I walked down the stairs of the deck with him, he stops and starts to growl and whimper towards the wood line along the right side of the house. I thought maybe there was a coyote or something, so I walked towards the wood line to get a better view to see what he was freaked out by. I see something just barely in sight. It stood a good 6 or 7 feet tall, and had patches of fur like mange, a short snout, very canine-looking, but kind of human-like face, staring back at me. I backed up, grabbed Jack, ran up the stairs, and locked the front door behind me. I never saw it again after that, and it didn't make any moves other than when it was looking at me. But it spooked me so bad I refused to go outside or even anywhere within the house by myself, to the point I was too scared to even leave my room to use the bathroom. Now that I'm older, I've started to wonder, maybe I just imagined it, or maybe it was misidentified, but who knows? I am able to go outside and stuff now. I even avidly hike and work for the State Park Service, so don't worry about that. But even now, I don't like to be at my stepdad's house, as it gives me the creeps and always feels like something is watching me. Our second story comes from Small Salamander 656 on Reddit. I still don't believe this myself, and I hate that I'm even putting this out there, but I'm coming to terms that this did actually happen, and honestly, this encounter changed me forever. Sometime in the early 2010s, or close to that time, my ex-girlfriend of 10 years and I saw two beings in a very unlikely and odd place. The time was about 1 a.m., and we were driving through Petersburg, Virginia. As we are coming to a stop at a red light, we turn and look to our right, and about 100 feet away is the restaurant. Now, mind you, this place is closed for the night, and all the lights are off inside, except for one, and it's right above the two beings. They honestly must have had some kind of way to make me and my ex unable to remember what the faces looked like, but neither of us had ever seen anything like them. They definitely were not people. They sat across from each other at the window seat, with a single light illuminating them from above. The light was part of the restaurant, not anything from like a ship or portal or anything. Now, not only were they sitting down, across from each other, but they seemed to be eating. The one thing we do remember is they each had bluish, reddish purple, and gold robes that almost shimmered. We must have sat at the light for what seemed like forever, as it cycled from red to green and back, while we were essentially dumbstruck. Cell phone cameras were not the same as today, and honestly, we were both in so much shock that all we could manage to do was stare at the beings looking back at each other in disbelief, saying, "What the fuck?" over and over again. We did pull off and away from the light, but it was out of fear, honestly. After realizing that we might be seeing something we shouldn't, we drove off very fast. If anyone had any therapists that specialize in people that have experienced odd things with witnesses, please let me know, because it honestly is still very disturbing when I stop and rethink about that evening. Our third story comes from HullJack96 on Reddit. I have always denied anything supernatural, but this experience changed my view on the world. I am now obsessed with reading people's stories or anything new that has been posted about these things specifically. Here is my story to share with all you open-minded folk. First of all, here is a little bit about the area it happened in. I live just off the Isle of Skye in Scotland. In the village where I live, there's 2 bridges linking the mainland to Skye. Between the bridges is a wee island that has a lighthouse and 2 cottages going back hundreds of years. Famously, Gavin Maxwell resided in one of them. Anyway, there's always been a lot of folklore around the lighthouse. Everyone who has worked there over the centuries has always said the same story, which is that they heard loud voices calling loudly inside the building and massive change in atmosphere. But none of the workers who stayed there, from centuries all over the world, mind, could ever identify where exactly it was coming from or understand what the language was. Nor did they see who or what was calling out. Regardless of this, I don't know if perhaps my experience is linked to the folklore, but it happened in the exact same area, which for me personally made my encounter all the more creepy. The encounter. One night in the spring of 2019, I was running the Sky Bridge after work at about 9 p.m. I stopped to take rest on the first smaller bridge between the cottages and the mainland. The bridge was in complete darkness, and I was using my torch to see where I was going. I leaned on the barrier to catch my breath, looking out over the moonlit loch. When I turned my head and looked in the direction of the distant streetlights, about 100 meters or so away, I was utterly stunned. The hair stood up all over me, and my nerves were shot to pieces. I locked my eyes on what seemed to be a 12-foot, giant, blurry stick figure across the road, almost the height of the streetlights. It had no features other than see-through shades of dark blue and black. Its legs and arms were the same long, thin shape of its body, as was its tall, featureless, squared head. What's more disturbing is the millisecond I saw it, I felt an overwhelming feeling of vulnerability and dread. It was a dramatic change in the air and a very terrible atmosphere. The scariest part for me was that when I watched this thing cross the road, from the right side of the road, my side, to the left, it took long, smooth, slow strides and didn't seem to make contact with the ground. It glided with its steps. When it reached the other side, it went through the stone wall that follows along the road into the blackness, then instantly reappeared back on my side. It then proceeded to cross the road over and over. This happened around 5 times until it never reappeared. This is the only thing I have ever witnessed in my life that I cannot explain, and it utterly shocked me to my core. And now I really am just mesmerized. There really are weird things going on in the world. Since that day, I'm very nervous about going through there. It's always in the back of my mind, even when I drive to work in daylight. Please, if anyone on here has had a similar experience, please contact me. I had never even heard of anything like this before, not even bloody Slenderman. Then I find online that people have had incredibly similar experiences to me. That made it crystal clear in my mind that I really had seen something, and it can't be a coincidence. I've been fascinated ever since. Our 4th story comes from Uger on Reddit. Location: Boone, Iowa, USA. I had some weird stuff happen last night. I took my 2 dogs for walks. I normally walk Finn, large, all-black German Shepherd, towards the park, where I have had these experiences. And I walk Uger, Chi Terrier mix, the other direction downtown. On my walk with Finn, about a block away in the direction I was headed, I saw 3 or 4 deer calmly walking towards the park. Most nights where something weird happens to me start like this. The deer seemed completely unbothered by me as I approached. They kept walking toward the park, but stopped every few blocks to look back at me, as if they wanted me to follow them. Then, as Finn and I reached where the deer were, I noticed about 10 or more other deer waiting as well. They all start walking together, calm, but still looking back at me every few feet. On the way towards the park, I smell the stench of rotting meat. I know the smell very well, as I used to be a butcher. It was strong, like someone plugged my nostrils with rotting ground meat or something. At the same time I smell this stench, I get the chills. Finn's hair stands up and he gets more nervous. I can feel the air around me get colder. As we continue walking, I look down an alleyway that cuts the block in half, and if you would walk down the dark alley, would spot you out where I eventually walk back home. I was 2 blocks away from the park. When you reach the park, you can either turn around and walk down the same road, or you can continue into the park, or you can continue on the road which turns left. Looking down that alleyway, you are looking at the part of the road that continues left, which is the way I take every night on the way back home. What I saw, I tried to convince myself wasn't real. Or maybe I just saw something else, and my brain tried to convince me it was this. I saw a large, muscular, pale, hairless creature that was moving fast. So fast I could barely see it. I saw the motion down the alley about 2 blocks away. The exit of the alley on that side has a street light directly above it. It wasn't standing still. It was moving, and it was moving fast. The only reason I'm positive what I saw wasn't deer or something normal is because of something I saw later that night that I will write about when I talk about my walk with Booger. It solidified that what I saw was something I wasn't supposed to see. In the meantime, I convinced myself I was making stuff up. As we approached the tree line of the park, the large group of deer moved to the side of the street where the neighborhood is, while I'm on the side with the tree line. I noticed something in the clearing. A lone deer, separate from the large group across the street, staring directly at me. I have my flashlight pointed at him. I even hung up my call with my wife to use my phone to take a video of this moment. This lone deer doesn't even have micro movements from breathing. The other deer across the street were constantly readjusting. You might be thinking to yourself, oh yeah, deer do that with bright lights shining at them. Deer in headlights always act that way. Just wait. Finn starts to pull very hard and acts anxious, nearly knocking me over. I turn to look across the street towards the large group of deer for at most 3 seconds before quickly turning around to face the lone deer again. In those 3 seconds, the lone deer is easily 30 feet closer to me, still not moving, staring directly at me. I have this on video. I have pictures. I felt weird. I felt unsafe. I've lived in rural Iowa my whole life. I am and have always lived outdoors. This didn't feel normal. I was scared. I back away while shining my light at the deer. Once I get a block or so away, he finally turns around and calmly walks into the tree line. The whole way home, I feel like I'm being stalked. Not just watched, but like something is following me. Now, I went home and sat for a bit, and tried to talk myself into believing it was all coincidence. After nearly 20 minutes, I started to walk Booger, my smaller chi-mix. The entire walk was nice and very enjoyable, actually. I had my earbuds in and was talking to my wife about what I saw in a joking way. "Man, I really scared myself for no reason," I said. At the end of the walk, I turned to go down our alleyway as I leave from the garage on our walks. I stopped speaking from what I saw on the opposite end of the alley. My wife heard me stop. I want to preface this with I did not have any substances, including alcohol, for weeks up to that point. The most I ever do in that department is a few beers, or some weed to ease anxiety if its life is getting hard. I have no mental conditions that will cause me to hallucinate. The most I have is a personality disorder resulting from trauma that I've been overcoming quickly this last year. I saw 2 large, muscular, pale, hairless creatures walking like apes at the end of the alley. The same thing I thought I saw with Finn, this time not going fast, much closer, and it felt intentional. I saw them walk across the street, very slowly, staring directly at me. These were not deer. They didn't have long faces like deer. They didn't have fur or tails. They didn't walk like deer. They weren't slender like a deer. My first thought was honestly that I was looking at 2 hairless male lions in the middle of Iowa. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, well after they had left my sight. 15 seconds later, I finally get the courage to walk the few feet into the garage. When I take my first step, I see a third one, slowly meandering across the street, staring at me. Booger noticed him too, and started growling. I ran to the door and watched the garage shut all the way. The entire night, Finn guarded the bedroom door. He never does that. He sat staring at the door all night. Booger stared at the windows all night. He never does that either. This happened to me yesterday night, Monday, May 13th, 2024. I don't know what to think. Our 5th story comes from Agitated 1598 on Reddit. I know that this is most likely going to sound made up, and that's why I haven't posted about it yet. But I can't seem to get it off my mind, and I'm wondering if anybody has any information or similar experiences. I was out in Long Island, New York, around the beginning of the year 2022, when I went out for a late-night drive with 2 friends of mine. We were about 40 minutes away from my house when we started feeling a really heavy presence surrounding us as we went down a specific road. My friend asked if we could turn around and go down the other turn instead, but doing that led us to a dead end, so we had to go back. As we drove down the road that felt menacing, we passed a cemetery that had 2 beings that appeared to be humans, standing in robes, facing a statue of the Blessed Mother and waving a wand towards it. As we drove by, we noticed that it seemed odd, so we drove into the gate and parked a few feet away from them, to which they appeared to be statues at first. But then, without even moving, they had started facing us and waving the wand over us. Their faces looked largely expressionless, but also had features that I can only describe as a mix between a witch and a pig. My friend that was driving took off, and we started to head home, all feeling like something malicious was there. As we got further into the drive, we realized that we were told to go back in the same direction, as the GPS rerouted us back to the same coordinates that they were at. Needless to say, we did not go back, but we all returned home and felt sick all night. Some time had passed, and I told another friend of mine about this experience, and he said he wanted to go there because he had never experienced anything like it. We went, and he started feeling sick as we pulled up again, so he kept driving and left. Later on that night, he was home with only his girlfriend, and they both heard what seemed to be something running up to the door and violently slamming on it, which also knocked some stuff off the shelves down. But when they went looking through the house, there was nobody there. I can't find any information on anything like this, and I'm very tempted to go back, but I can't get myself to actually do it just yet, out of fear and lack of understanding. Our sixth story comes from Case Files of VJ on Reddit. Tom, 2018, Queensland, Australia. I, 42 male, was heading on a hike to Lamington National Park with a woman I was seeing for a few months at the time, Belinda. She brought along her 2 boys, 10 and 12. I had met them a few times, but this was going to be a good bonding experience to see how we got along on an overnight adventure. I really liked Bea, and I wanted to get serious with her. There was a lot counting on this. My old boy used to bring me up to this campsite called Binnaburra. Our favorite hike was the Kumara Circuit. You start on the top of the mountain with all the views, then descend down into the valleys where there's a lush rainforest, waterfalls, and whatnot. Stunning place, teeming with an abundance of beautiful, colorful birds, reptiles, these bright blue yabbies that lay scattered along the tracks, fireflies, and a multitude of leeches and ticks, packed eat. The drive from Brisbane was good, and the boys loved the drive up the mountain. Belinda, not so much. She apparently has a fear of heights, I learned. There were on and off showers, and the track was slippery, but we packed ponchos, and the kids were having a blast as we set off on our trek. We booked a safari tent up near the lodge, and everything seemed to be going perfectly for our weekend getaway. We were about halfway through the hike when the youngest boy slipped and hurt his knee as we were crossing a creek. It was only a graze, but I think the shock of getting a bit wet and the panic made him a bit emotional, and he was crying for a bit. I cleaned up the scrape, put on some band-aids, and decided to carry him on my shoulders for a bit until he felt better. Belinda was acting quiet, and I thought maybe she wasn't enjoying herself. She was laughing and joking around just before. I thought maybe I did something wrong, or she was upset her son got hurt. I asked if she was good. She nodded and smiled and went along gazing around quietly. We started heading up the mountain for a bit, and as we were walking, we could hear something thundering through the trees towards us. Branches snapping, loud bangs, impacts. We looked up the hill to see a large stone, the size of a basketball, flying down just ahead of us on the trail. We watched as it bounced across our path, hitting into a tree and continuing down the hill. I warned everyone to watch out. Sometimes with erosion, rocks can fall. I was honestly shaken. A rock like that could easily kill someone if it hit them. We continued walking, keeping an eye on the hill above for more rocks and debris as we zigzagged up and around the mountain. Only 5 minutes later, another rock came crashing down. This one further away, but it was followed by another that was coming right towards us. We had plenty of time to get out of the way, but if we hadn't been paying attention. When the third came, I knew something was up. This wasn't right. Someone was throwing these rocks down the mountain. It didn't feel like a natural occurrence. The way they were spread out, it didn't make sense. I shouted up the mountain that if someone was doing that to stop, there's hikers. In response, another rock flew down towards us. I screamed out that they were going to kill someone, that we had children with us. 2 more large boulders crashed down the hill, leaving a trail of destruction. We heard shouts of another 3 or 4 people, another group of hikers further down the hill, shouting out the same complaints as us. A man ran up ahead until he was in shouting distance and called out to us. Another stone came crashing down. By this point, the kids were crying. Belinda was shaking. I told them to stay there, that I would run up ahead, and I did just that. I started running up the hill until I couldn't breathe any longer. I reached where the zigzag ended and continued along the mountain ridge, and no one was there. I went up and down the trail until I reached an elderly couple sitting on a bench at a lookout. I talked to them for a few minutes, asking if they saw anything or any other hikers. They said they hadn't, that they had come from the opposite way and hadn't seen anyone for ages. A guided tour group a few kilometers back the other way, but too long ago to be the culprits. I went back down to Belinda and the kids. By this time, they were with the other hikers, and we did the last leg of the journey together. We caught up with the old couple as well near the exit. Once we left the group with some of the other hikers, bombarding one of the rangers, we headed towards the shower blocks. Belinda pulled me aside once she had the kids organized, and she told me that she didn't want to stay there overnight. I was a bit shocked. Earlier when we arrived, she said she loved the safari tents, and we had plans to sit around the fire and have a nice barbecue dinner. I asked her why, and she said she didn't feel comfortable. I assured her no one would try messing with us around the campsite. It was probably just some stupid teenagers. They wouldn't be a nuisance up near the campgrounds and lodge. Stupid teenagers within a year of this burned the lodge to the ground. She told me she didn't think it was teenagers. I asked her why she thought that, and she said when her boy had slipped in the water and was crying, she said she thought she saw something. She said it was big and brown, and when her eyes first scanned past it, she thought it was just part of the forest, like a log or a rock. But as she moved her eyes past it again, it moved. This thing, she said, was bigger than me and hairy, but also covered in moss and grandfather's beard and leaves so it blended in. She said she only saw it for a moment. She had brushed it off as just a trick of the mind. She said she knew it wasn't, but she was trying to convince herself as we walked. I asked her why she didn't say anything. She told me she didn't want to scare the kids, then went on to say that after the rock thing, she was even more freaked out. I didn't know what to think, and I have to admit I acted a bit pouty with her, which she was not impressed by. After we had showered and dressed, she told the kids that we were going home tonight. They seemed disappointed, but didn't put up too much of a fuss. The afternoon had rattled them. It was a quiet drive home, and the kids were asleep by the time we reached the bottom of the mountain. I dropped them home and apologized to Belinda for the trip not working out that great. She was in brighter spirits now that we were off the mountain, and thanked me so much for the day and for planning a special weekend for her and the kids. We ended up seeing each other more and eventually moved in with each other. We got married this January. Now, after some time has passed, my wife and I have talked this over. We have 3 theories. 1, it was some pesky teenagers hiding off the trail. 2, that friendly old couple wasn't as friendly as they seemed. 3, there's something weird and big up in those mountains, and it likes to throw rocks at hikers. My wife thinks it's option 3. I'm heading closer toward option 2. I did some research and told her that if it was a Bigfoot creature, she would have smelt it, and that the smelliest thing out there was her feet. In conclusion, we usually chose the beach over bushwalks now, regardless of whether it was people or unknown cryptids. It kind of spoiled the fun of taking my family out for hikes in one of my favorite places in the world. I might go back one day, probably just by myself. I've done those hikes countless times before with no issues, but you best believe I'm going to be keeping a very good lookout for big, hairy mountain men. Our 7th story comes from GCU on Reddit. So this happened to my friend, not me, in 2007. But she's here next to me recounting her story, and I'm typing it out and posting it for her because she doesn't have Reddit. Sorry it's long, but I want to share as many details as possible to hear your thoughts about it. We're adults now, and this happened to her when she was 16. To this day, she describes what she saw in the exact same way and can still clearly picture it. So here goes. She was walking home from her friend's house at night. This is a town in southern Oregon, in case that's important. She doesn't remember the exact time, but says it was definitely after midnight, and it was dark, and no one else was out. She says she was completely sober and not sleep-deprived. So she's on her way home, and just about 2 blocks from her house, she was walking on the sidewalk along the main street, was crossing between 5th and 6th Street. Her house is on 7th. Across the street is a Safeway and a cemetery. Right then, she noticed something about 50 feet ahead of her, crossing the street from the cemetery side to the side she was on. This is how she describes it. There were 2 creatures, things, walking on their hind legs, side by side. One was slightly shorter than the other, but they were both really tall, at least 7 feet. They were hunched over, lanky, and extremely skinny. She said her immediate first thought was they looked almost like deer walking on their hind legs, but they didn't have any fur. It was more like a dark, grayish skin. They held their arms and wrists kind of like how a T-Rex would, but their arms and hands were very long, almost as long as their legs. When I asked, she said she didn't see any tails. I asked her if they had hooves. She says she thinks so, but can't remember that part for certain. Everything was quiet. She didn't hear them making any sounds on the pavement as they walked. I asked her if they had antlers or deer-like shaped faces, me thinking it maybe actually was just a hairless deer walking on their hind legs for some reason. She said no antlers. Their heads were not shaped like a deer, or any animal, but more like a person. She describes their faces as looking human, with human features, but something was just slightly off. She had frozen where she was as soon as she saw them. Everything was quiet. There were no cars driving by or anyone else around, which is normal at night in our small town. She says she kind of stood there in shock. She watched as the two creatures slowly walked side by side, silently, from across the street and over to the side of the street that she was on. She says they didn't seem to see her at all, or if they did notice her, they didn't act like they did. She said they acted as if they were simply a couple, going on a casual night stroll together. She doesn't remember feeling any negative energy or vibes. She just felt fear because she was pretty damn scared. As soon as they finished crossing the street, they continued straight down 6th Street, and she couldn't see them after they passed the first house and kept walking down. At that point, she said she snapped out of the shock and started running the one more block towards 6th Street to see where they were going. Once she turned down 6th Street to follow them, they were completely gone. She doesn't know where they could have possibly gone that fast, considering they were just walking, and not walking fast, but like I said, almost as if the two of them were just out on a casual night stroll. As soon as she realized they had somehow disappeared out of nowhere, she started running as fast as she could, the one more block to her house on Stebbins Street. She told her mom and sister the next morning. She says these creatures were like nothing she has ever seen or heard of before. The closest thing she can compare it to is the werewolf that Professor Lupin changed into in the Harry Potter movies. Hairless, super lanky, and hunched over strangely. Except these ones had more human-like heads and faces than a wolf. She's only ever told her family and a few friends, me being one of them. Oh, and she also has no history of any mental illnesses. But whenever I ask her about it, she describes it the exact same way, and is still pretty shook up when she thinks about it. Nothing like that has happened to her before then, or since then. Anyone know what this could be? I've heard about not deers on Reddit, but I'm not really sure that fits because I think those are more animal-like shaped and usually on all fours. Our 8th story comes from Quest Brand Pizza on Reddit. Hello. This happened when I was about 17 years old, now 24, female, in northern Louisiana, USA. Even though it's been a while, lately I keep thinking about it like I literally can't sleep because I just keep wondering if it really happened, and weirdly, I've also been wondering how he's doing. For extra context, I did not do any drugs this night. I'd been to dinner and a movie with a friend, and we didn't drink either. I know I was 17, but disclaimer, seriously, stone, cold, sober. I met up with an old friend for dinner. It was a Saturday early evening. We decided to go to a movie downtown. Downtown was usually not, busy, but on Saturdays you expect a bit more people than there were. The movie theater is across from a public building with a bathroom that's extra nice, so we decided to go there first. It has loft apartments there, and I clocked a guy in the lobby just looking straight down at his phone. I clocked him because he's a man and we are young girls. His build was probably about 5'10" if I had to guess, and he has a super regular body, like not fat or skinny, just super average guy. I couldn't see his face, but I noticed him when we walked into the lobby from the bathroom, and he walked at a don't hold the door distance away from us, and also went to the movies. So, me and my friend sit at the top middle seats for the movie. About 5 rows down was an older couple, and literally the rest of the room was just empty seats. He then comes in, still staring at his phone like it was so weird you couldn't fully make out his face, even though his phone was bright. But of course, I wasn't trying to stare at this person, just wanted to not get kidnapped. He seemed close to our age, 19, 20-ish, but you never know. So he comes and sits on our row, at the very far left end. Arguably a pretty terrible spot choice with so many options. Proceeds to stare at his phone, brightness on full, for the entire length of the movie. I was a little nosy at this point, sue me, but I looked over at him throughout the film, just glancing to see what was so important on his phone because it was bright and, I don't know, the situation was weird. It was a bright white screen, and he wasn't clicking or playing or doing anything, but just holding his phone, and I don't know, that's just actually it. So, movie ends, we go to leave. I'm holding the door for the older couple. He's behind them, so I decide to stay holding the door. As he gets closer, he looks up at me, so I smiled. And his face looked regular at first. Pretty attractive, actually. But when he smiled, his smile changed very quickly into his whole face. It was such a huge smile. It did not feel real at all. Not a creepy movie way or someone with a big mouth, but not human. And his eyes flashed I don't know, but they were just different. I guess my face looked immediately shocked. I feel so bad. Because then his eyes went back to normal, and he looked normal, but his facial expression was like he was embarrassed or caught, and he looked back down at his phone and continues to walk past me through the door. So I followed him as he walked around me and the door, meaning I did a 270 kind of turn around to watch him walk away. And by the time I'd spun around, he was actually literally gone. I'm saying he was very close to me, walking by, and I spun while he was walking. And also, we were in a fairly quiet downtown. Even if this man started running away, there was no alley to run down, and I would have seen him running or walking. I even walked out a ways to see if he hid behind a parked car, which there were only literally 2. Also, if anyone wanted to know, he was dressed in a white t-shirt, denim jeans, denim jacket, and had medium brown hair. His skin was like a white guy, not super pale, just medium, regular white guy skin tone. I don't know. I went back and searched the movie that we were watching's release date. So, a little update is this all took place in late November of 2018. Okay, so I snapped back to reality, thinking that was insane. Am I crazy? Also, I need to drive my friend back to her car. So, we leave. I drop her off, and then I head home. Context about my drive home. The last 7 minutes of my drive is a flat highway. Speed limit 55. Trees on either side with some breaks in between. There is a larger park area before turning into my neighborhood. There are 2-ish lights to the right side that are red and white, like, I don't know what they are, just airplane towers or something. They're always there. I know where. I recognize them. Okay, so I'm in the last stretch. And just before I was noticing, like, dang, it's really a super calm, quiet Saturday, like, there's no cars. It's pretty still outside. At the 7th minute-ish zone, I see this big white ball of light up by my neighborhood, seeming like in the middle of the road. So I kept driving, like, what is that? As I got closer, it seemed like it was pretty close to the road, but actually above it? Above the street. Not in the field to the right where the poles are in the distance. As I pulled up to the left turn into the neighborhood, I just parked. There was this massive aircraft just silently hovering above the road. About the height of the pine trees, maybe. Not near the trees, though. The trees are more in my neighborhood. I just stared at it. Mouth open, probably. I can only see the undercarriage of it, and it looked like an isosceles triangle, and seemed to have, like, sheet metal panel-looking things. I'd have to imagine that's not what it is, but that's what it looked like. With little dots where I imagine maybe bolts to be? I don't know tool terms. It felt like he was in it. Okay, so I know it was 11-ish when I left the theater. Maybe 11:55, 12:05 when I got home. It's about a 30-minute drive to my house, so I must have sat there for a good little bit just staring. No wind or noise. I finally decided to turn into my neighborhood. It moved to the left of my neighborhood and stayed just outside the tree line. The only way I can describe the movement would be like gliding. To get around my car was quick. Once at the tree line, it moved slowly, like it was just watching me drive the rest of the way home or some particular interest. Actually, when I got home, I got out of my car and looked through the trees. I can see the white and red lights that are always there. Then this white light, right where it was by the tree line before I went too deep into the neighborhood. It stayed there. I finally went inside around 12:15 and ran to my parents and, like, asked them, what type of plane can make no wind or sounds that might do testing here? We literally started Googling and couldn't figure it out. We went to bed. Felt like I was being watched all night and for several days after that. Checked the next night. There was no light except the ones that are always there. And ever so often since then I've thought of him. I feel bad if I hurt him by the reaction on my face. Anyway, any info about this or other encounters similar is much appreciated. I don't know what I'm trying to do, but I just can't sleep because I keep wondering if I'm insane. If it really happened. It feels like I'm supposed to not remember. Or maybe it's just starting to fade. But I still have doubts until I run through the story again. And I'm like, no, I saw it. It was wild. Our 9th story comes from Ronan Bug on Reddit. Almost exclusively joined Reddit to have a place to tell this story, because my friends may be tired of me thinking about this. This happened in Mexico City, neighborhood called San Pedro de los Pinos. I was about 13 or 14 years old, 35 today. It was around 4 or 5 p.m., so there was plenty of sun through closed orange curtains on my parents' room on a PH apartment. The room had a big window on 2 walls, facing east and south. No smartphones or small video cameras then. My mother calls me and my sister because she was seeing something. I have vague memories of how this whole thing began. Don't know if I saw it right away as I walked into her room, but I do remember sitting on the bed, looking at the shadow of a person as if it was floating right outside the window. At first we tried to make sense of it, thinking it could be a prank or a bird or whatever, but it wasn't going away. It actually started moving. I would even say it was gliding sideways. Didn't move its arms at any time. It was just sort of standing straight and gliding. We were very scared at this point. My mom decided to stand up and see what's behind the curtain. Sis and I are screaming in fear for her not to do so. Mother lifts up the curtain, and we see nothing there. As she puts it back down, she walks back in terror to join us on the bed. We were all terrified and screaming at this point. We couldn't think of even leaving the room. We were paralyzed, I guess. Then, the shadow glided to the end of the window and turned around, continued to be visible on the other window, different wall, different axis of projection relative to the sun. This was what made me feel the full panic. It continued to glide until the end of that other window, and went to where my sister's room window would be. I then ran out of there to go look for my friend next door, to tell him what we just saw. To this day, I have nightmares with that, and I can't look at a curtain with some light through it without looking for that shadow or something. I don't even know if I'm afraid to see it again. I'd just like to know whatever it was. Our 10th story comes from Uncle Mulf on Reddit. Me and my girlfriend slept at my parents' house whilst they were out in the camper van for the night, and both experienced nightmares within an hour of each other. The house my parents lived in was owned by an old couple which passed before we moved in. We have both had experiences in the house before while being home alone and with each other. For example, I was washing dishes one night and felt strong eyes toward the back of my head. Felt like someone was really staring. So much so that I had to turn off my music and listen out for things. 5 minutes go by, and nothing else happened, until I feel a big gust of wind on the back of my neck, even though all the doors and windows were closed. This creeped me out so much that I had to finish drying the dishes with my back in the corner of the room so I could see everything. When my girlfriend was working from home alone, on the couch in the living room with her laptop, she would see black shapes move and peek past door frames, and feel like she was being watched. It got to the point where she had to FaceTime with me while I was at work just to speak to me and have someone. This is similar to the above. While upstairs, me and her were getting ready to sleep, she noticed something that looked like a small black figure dart out of the corner of her eye and run into my brother's room. There's 3 bedrooms in total. Mine, my parents, and my brother's. I've experienced this many times before, even before I met her, while home alone and with people in the house. When upstairs, if you're in the hall, there's a constant feeling of being watched from any of the bedrooms. We always kept the doors open and lights off inside. The darkness is really, really dark. Heads peeping around door frames, feelings of being chased, fingers moving in the corner of your vision, etc. In my dream, my girlfriend essentially was hiding the fact that she was now talking to someone she knew from 8 or 9 years ago, and hiding it from me. She was verbally abusive and narcissistic, which is the total opposite of what she's like in real life. Not how she is at all. That's the summary, however. The dream was horrible and left me feeling uneasy when I woke up and almost sick. My girlfriend's dream, me and her were staying the night at a campsite with some people we work with. There was families there, couples, everything. She noticed a family in particular, a woman that stood out with dark black hair. She thought nothing of it, and we went about our day. Later on, the woman comes up to my girlfriend and asks for donations, unsure what for. The woman then tells my girlfriend she needs to go into a room alone with her to do the donation. A bit wary, my girlfriend goes in the room but tries to lock the door right behind her before the woman can come in with her. This didn't work, and the woman begins cutting under her fingernails, slicing the pads of her fingers and palms of her hands all the way up her arm. The second part of the dream is my girlfriend trying to warn me about the woman. She eventually gets round to doing this. Long story short, I'm chasing the woman. She turns a corner. I follow, and she hits me in the back of the head with a hammer, which kills me, and she runs away. My girlfriend runs to follow and sees me lying on the floor and rushes over. She holds my head in her hands, and pools of blood rush from the back of my head and all over her. She's trying to get me to talk, but I'm unresponsive. She's screaming at the top of her lungs, but no one is hearing it, and no one comes to help. This day in her dream reoccurred 5 times. It happened the first time, then she would wake up and know what was going to happen that day and try to warn me, resulting in the hammer. Some of mine and my girlfriend's worst fears were experienced in nightmares, which we had within 1 hour of each other. Very realistic, and has us feeling and thinking about them hours later. It occurred in a house that we believed to be haunted or strange. Our 11th story comes from Throwaway Doppel on Reddit. Okay, this one is a doozy. Apologies if I get things wrong grammatically, as I'm extremely paranoid at the moment. I live in the UK, Devon, with my dog. It's important to note that there's a huge expanse of woods behind the house. Early last month, this thing that looks and sounds exactly like me begins to show itself directly to me. But I fear it's actually been around for much, much longer. About 4 years ago, my parents, grandmother, and cousins were over at mine for a get-together. I remember my mother going to smoke around the back. Not even a minute after going out, she comes back in, all flustered, asking me why I was outside in the woods. She said I was staring at her blankly. The thing is, I wasn't. I was inside with my grandmother and dad. My mom, bless her soul, passed it off as just seeing things. Stupidly, so did I. Cut to last year, I was in my lounge when my dog ran off into the conservatory barking like mad. This wasn't really surprising, as we do have quite a few rabbits and other vermin around the area. That was till, I kid you not, I heard my fucking voice talking in the conservatory. I checked outside. Nothing. Nothing at all. Last month, while cleaning the kitchen, I saw me outside in the wood. It looked one-on-one with me. Didn't move an inch. It was like a statue. I froze in place. I guess it was more the shock of seeing myself with my own two eyes physically. I leapt over to the conservatory door. Gone. It was gone. In the split time it took me to get to the door, this fucker was gone. Last Saturday, I was upstairs on a work assignment when I heard my voice asking to be let in. My dog was going nuts, and got worse when this thing was clawing and scratching at my windows and door. I contacted the police, and I'm away at my parents' house for the time being. I don't know what to tell people, or if they'll even believe me. I just want this to end. Any advice? Because I'm dreading when I see this thing again, or what it'll do. Our 12th story comes from Paula's Eyes on Reddit. Santiago Creek Wash, Orange, California. This is a true story, and it happened about 15 years ago. I used to spend a lot of time in Lake Tahoe and returned home to Santa Ana after several months. The morning after I returned, I walked from our home in Park Santiago to coffee in Old Town Orange. While I crossed over a bridge on Grand Avenue that spanned a wash which had a bike path and steep side embankments, I looked down to the left, and I saw a dark-haired man walking around, agitated by the bike trail. He was clawing at his chest and white shirt, and seemed completely disoriented. He was facing me. To his left was the 2-story brick wall beneath a gas station, and to his right was the bike trail and deep rocky wash. As I stood and watched him, I got my phone out to call the police, in case he started taking his shirt off. I'd run across pervs on the bike path in the past. Then suddenly, he bent down and picked up a red messenger bag. I noticed there was something white, like a sheet, at his feet. I thought it was odd that I hadn't noticed before. It all disappeared right in front of my eyes. There was nowhere he could have gone, as the area was a small land patch with only a tree and the tall wall. I thought, and just continued my walk. My husband picked me up at Starbucks to drive me home. As we both drove back over the wash, I told him what happened. He looked at me and said, "You saw a ghost, Someone was stabbed to death down there while you were gone. And that's all the stories we had time for today. Thank you for joining us around the Scaredy Campfire. Remember, everyone, if you've had your own creepy encounters, you can send them in and share them alongside the campfire with us. See you next time, and good night.
As the night gets longer and the darkness creeps in, with the eerie silence broken only by whispering wind, come gather round the fire, the flickering flames, and hear the tales of the spooky and the strange. A chill up your back, a shiver up your spine. You'll be haunted by the things that you find. Legends will unfold and stories will be told at the Scaredy Campfire, for only